Well, hello, everybody. I'm really delighted to be with Bill Farrell, who's the managing director and general counsel of Longford Capital, somebody who works with one of my most favorite people in the world, John Garda. And Bill and Longford and John are clients of the firm. They're important thought leaders in litigation, and this is going to be a really interesting conversation. Bill, welcome, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Craig. It's a pleasure to be here. And we do have our mutual friend, John Garda, to thank for this. Great friend of both of ours, and it's very nice of him to introduce him.
Yes. We met, I think, at a very rain-soaked pregame party before the Notre Dame UT game, where unfortunately for my side, UT did not fare very well. But I think I did, if I'm not mistaken, I did get to see a couple of future Cowboys in that game, Jalen Smith and Zach Martin. So all was not lost. Yeah, it was like a downpour. I remember the person who was hosting our pregame party holding up her tent, with one hand as it was trying to blow across the parking lot. But luckily it got nice for the game. But anyway, I want to jump in. You've got such an interesting background. I'd love to start, if you don't mind, with your childhood, because I think that really helps instruct who somebody is as they turn out in so many different ways. And talk a little bit about your father, his career, and how that kind of has been something that stuck with you as you've carried on as a lawyer and executive for 3 decades.
Thank you. Great place to start. My brother and I, who are now business partners at Longford Capital, we're very fortunate to have 2 fabulous parents, and they really serve as wonderful role models for us. In my father's case, he grew up in very humble beginnings in a small coal mining town in upstate Pennsylvania, and my grandfather was a coal miner, and my dad never went to college. He was drafted into the Army, and after the Army, became an editor and publisher of a trade magazine for the hardware home improvement industry. And because of that kind of broad experience reporting on an entire industry, a very large industry, probably about a $500 billion a year industry, learned a lot about it, and then moved into a role that, I'm very proud of, and I'm sure he is very proud of. He became the president and chief executive officer of the largest trade organization serving the hardware home improvement industry. And he held that role for 30 years. And, that was during all the formative years for my brother and myself. And we took a lot away from watching him succeed. And some of it sticks with us today. And then we serve, it kind of serves as our goal to emulate some of his achievements and his principles of adhering to the highest standards of ethics and integrity and self-reliance. It seems simple and easy, but if you can stick to those, good things will happen.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Those are great lessons. Any story that sticks out in your mind as being one that you kind of harken back to that was that aha moment as watching your dad proudly in his career?
I think it's a culmination of lots of experience with him, all that culminated in the same conclusion, which was he always stayed very humble, well-grounded, and focused on being the best he could be as a husband, a father, and also a business leader. And that might have hit me really hard when I had the pleasure of joining him in the Rose Garden of the White House on 2 occasions when he was receiving directly from President Reagan and then from President Bush, 41, awards for his efforts at his trade organization to help United States, American-based companies export their products abroad and really serving an important role in facilitating U.S. exports around the world. And, to see him accept an award from a sitting president in the Rose Garden and then go back to our hotel room and have room service and cheeseburgers was really cool. And, that memory's never left me.
That's fantastic. I suspect your father and my great grandfather may have crossed just a little bit with each other. My great grandfather was in the wholesale hardware business in Texas. Higginbotham Pearlstone was his company. I know at that time in the United States, it was such an important part of our industry and still is. But what a proud example to get to see as a son, to see your dad receive not one but two awards from the President of the United States. That is pretty cool. Yeah. Well, you went on and went to law school, and ultimately you went to two large firms that are nationally known, but you did not start that way. As I understand it, you started as a prosecutor in Cook County. Is that true?
Yes, that is right. When I was in law school, I had the good fortune of working at a third great law firm for my summers. And at the end of my second summer after my second year of law school, I spoke to some of the lawyers at that firm, and they asked me what I hoped to do after graduating from law school. And I told them I wanted to try cases. I wanted to be a trial lawyer. And they explained to me that really the fastest path to a courtroom was by giving back in some form of public service, working for a governmental agency where young people are, if they earn it, are given an opportunity to take on great responsibility. And that's what I did. I thought that that sort of experience would serve me very well in a career of law. And it was also just a great feeling of public service. And that's how I started my career in Chicago in the state prosecutor's office. And, just what I had hoped for in terms of getting a lot of experience early in my career is exactly what happened, more than I could have ever imagined. And it really helped me mature as a person and as a lawyer tremendously. So to the point where after just a few years, I had tried dozens and dozens of cases, both to judges and to juries. And I rely on that experience even today.
Well, and it's not just any state prosecutor's office, really. It's Chicago is such a great city. Really one of my favorite places in the world, but is frequently called the murder capital of the world. And so you certainly had experience with a very vibrant docket. Were there some things I know that you've got in your background? You had, if I remember correctly, a serial murder case, a number of very capital murder cases. Any observations from those experiences that those of us who have not had the privilege of participating in a trial in a criminal in our criminal process that you gleaned that could help us?
Absolutely. For most of my time at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, I worked in the Criminal Prosecutions Bureau, and that involved investigating violent crimes, including murders. And in the time that I was serving as an assistant state's attorney, we had a tremendous problem in Chicago with violent crime. In my years, I believe the murder rate was between 900 and 1,000 murders per year, which is about double the rate that has earned Chicago the dubious distinction of the murder capital of the country today. There have been great strides made in trying to quell violence, particularly concentrated in south and west sides of Chicago. And what I take away most of all, and we could talk forever on this topic, Craig, but what I take away most of all, and it served me well in private practice and also today at Longford Capital, is that nothing is as simple as it might seem. It's never as simple as it seems, as portrayed in the 30-second soundbite in the newspaper or on TV. What I found was people are complex, almost without exception. There are dozens of murder suspects that I spoke to as part of a murder investigation that struck me as, kind people, strangely enough. And it became apparent to me in speaking to those people that all of them had different dimensions to their personality. They could have been very kind at heart, and they maybe just made a terrible mistake because of peer pressure resulting from, gang affiliations or drug use or some other problem. And it led me to believe, and this is what I took away first and foremost from my experience. It led me to believe that there is a tremendous amount of hope for everybody. And it starts with primary and secondary education. If we could just show underprivileged children that there's a way to a wonderful life. And I think that's through education. Personally, I think that's also through God. We'd have a much better situation on our hands in Chicago and probably around the country.
Of course, we find ourselves doing this remotely. Otherwise, we'd be in person or a different medium. Find ourselves a little over a week removed from the George Floyd murder and in the middle still of a pandemic that our world is experiencing, causing changes. And we're going to get to that second piece in a little while. But, as you reflect on the listening that I think many of us are doing in connection with the recent events, the most notable of which was the George Floyd murder, but there's certainly other examples, and kind of what your insights are. Are there any thoughts you have about what we need to be thinking about to be appropriate allies to influence or change some of the systemic racism that may exist in our legal system?
One thing that has struck me in Chicago anyway is that since the horrific incident that involved Mr. Floyd, we have had dozens and dozens of shootings in Chicago, in the South and West Side neighborhoods, and dozens of African Americans have died as a result of those shootings. And their lives matter very, very much, and everybody matters. And I wish we would spend time focusing on, like I mentioned before, more of a grassroots, community-driven effort to increase educational opportunities for all of our citizens, which I think will lead to progress and success. And that's really where I try to focus my time and effort, is on a regular basis, helping young people in our communities just see the potential for a future, a bright future, and not cause them to think that life on the streets is their only option, and because it's not.
Well, thank you for that. I know it's a tough topic, and we're all hearing and listening about what it means to be a person of color in our society today. And I knew you'd have some very interesting insights on that. You probably know from John Garda, because he's been a big supporter of our effort, that my wife and I founded an intercity program for urban policy debate in Dallas, which really comes from my friends in Chicago who started the program, the National Association of Urban Debate Leagues, which is actually founded in your city. And it's those incremental efforts that I think help move that starting line a little more equal. Hopefully we can take some action to change what we're seeing around us. So thank you for that. I know it's a tough topic right now.
Craig, thank you for all of those efforts you and your wife make. And I've also seen from your firm, K&L Gates, that you've made your positions abundantly clear, that you are in support of equal rights and civil rights, and you're going to, as one of the preeminent firms in the world, do what you can to help advance those causes, and it's wonderful. That's why one of the many reasons we're so proud to be working with you and your firm.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Bill. So you got that great experience, which, few people can get that kind of trial experience today in commercial litigation. And then you moved into into two great firms. What are some things that you feel like from being a prosecutor you carried with you that might have given you a leg up? You've received so many awards for your client service and the way you approached clients. Was there something in particular from the Cook County prosecutor's office that you took with you into the commercial litigation realm that you think, maybe, feel free to be, please, immodest, that maybe gave you a little bit of a leg up in a commercial litigation setting?
Well, one of the things that I enjoy most about my job and all of my jobs has been interacting with people and trying to understand people. And I learned an awful lot about that as a prosecutor, taking the skills of being able to listen to people coming from, perhaps the most extreme situations, and trying to understand them, understand their motivations, understand whether they're telling me the truth or trying to, skirt the truth, and how to motivate them to tell me the truth has been really important. And I've carried it with me throughout. Interacting with juries, I find, is a very personal experience, trying to understand each and every juror and trying to get them to understand me and my client's position is a quality that I think was born in my time at the state's attorney's office. And now as a commercial litigation funder at Longford Capital, we have a policy that we must meet our clients in person whenever possible. That's been a little tough, as of late with the stay-at-home orders. But we think making a personal connection and understanding, maybe the intangibles. So we might understand that a particular client has a very meritorious breach of contract claim. But at Longford, we want to understand what's the motivation for trying to enforce those legal rights. What is the client trying to achieve? Is it to just have a judge rule in their favor so that they have a feeling of justice, or is it to achieve a commercially reasonable financial result? Everybody has a different approach to litigation, and I want to understand it from a very personal level. And so that's one of the things that I think has served me well in my career in private practice, and also as a person working at litigation finance at Longford Capital.
Yeah, you and I talked about it. I mean, that's selfishly one of the reasons why I love doing this, because when you kind of deconstruct where people come from and, the experiences they've had, even dating back when they were children, you really understand what makes them tick. And we're going to get into in a minute your motivation for starting Longford with your brother and kind of the vision for the company, the great company that you're in your third raise with $1 billion under management. But it really hits me, the concept of really understanding who people are and where they're coming from, because it instructs strategy at such a high level, even with witnesses. It's a great lesson for litigators out there. So you and your brother at some point, I assume, talked about forming this company, which when you formed it, I mean, even today, it's not exactly a road that's frequently traveled. I mean, the concept of litigation funding is a very new concept in the United States. Tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea and some of maybe the bumps in the road that might have occurred as you were, trying to get that first fund going, and how you learned from those challenges.
Well, back in 2009, my brother Tim Farrell succeeded my father as the chief executive officer at the great organization. And the third founder of Longford Capital, a gentleman by the name of Mike Nichols, and I were partners at our law firm. And it was in 2009 that we first learned of this idea of third-party commercial litigation finance, the notion that a third party, not the client involved in litigation or its law firm, would participate in the funding of attorney's fees and expenses incurred in connection with pursuing a meritorious legal claim. And it was a very, very novel idea. In fact, I had never heard of it before. I don't think anyone in the United States had heard of it before. I learned about it with a company that had begun in the UK at that time. And my initial reaction, Craig, was that it's too bad that this is prohibited in the United States, because I thought that it was such a smart idea, a solution to the ever-increasing call by corporate clients for alternatives to the billable hour model, that I thought it was unfortunate that it was somehow impermissible in the United States. But I took the time to research why or under what rule this was prohibited. And I couldn't find the rule. You know, there was no prohibition against litigation financing in the United States. And in fact, it blended in quite well with the range of possibilities that corporate clients involved in litigation use as a means of paying for their legal services. The first and most obvious being simply paying their lawyers. Companies pay their lawyers most often on an hourly basis for excellent legal work. Where does that money come from? It might come from cash. It might come from borrowing at the company, borrowing using their line of credit. It could come from other sources, loans from other sources, banks, floating of bonds, issuing equity and selling equity, and then other means by which clients pay for their legal services might include contingency arrangements with their law firms. I immediately thought of it as a solution for clients approaching me and my firm seeking alternatives to the billable hour. I thought it would be a great alternative to saying, I'm sorry, our firm does not offer contingency relationships. And I began to study it, and at some point included my brother Tim in the discussion. Now, at that point, Tim was representing about 1,000 United States manufacturing companies, ranging from, multi-billion-dollar publicly traded companies down to hundreds and hundreds of family-owned businesses. And his reaction to this also helped form our future in pursuit of Longford Capital. And his reaction was, almost every one of my 1,000 member companies is involved in litigation, virtually at all times. And you're now telling me that they have an option, an alternative to paying their lawyers on a monthly basis. And that option is transfer that cost to a third party, a funding organization specifically designed for that purpose, and that the funding will be in the form of an equity non-recourse investment that is only required to be repaid if the company is successful in the litigation. It's not a loan, but rather an investment in the outcome of the case. And he said, I'll do the survey, but I don't even need to do it. I'll tell you what the answer is. Companies will, for that alternative, easily more than 50% of the time.
That's fascinating. And so from there, you had to take your concept out to investors and get that money in the door. Now, I know the first tranche was friends and family more, but talk about that process. Did you have a hard time convincing people to buy into this concept? It's obviously forbidden for basically for non-lawyers to own a piece of a law firm. And so you're on this, yes, it's not technically forbidden, but you're certainly on the edge of a groundbreaking new industry. What were some of the struggles you had in those early fundraising periods?
From the time we learned about this idea of litigation finance in 2009, we did a lot of study over a 2-year period. And we tried to surround ourselves with experts in the field, including John Garda, one of our early advisors when he was your partner at K&L Gates. And we tried to find answers to all of the questions that might be asked of us by investors, by law firms and lawyers, and by clients. And after vigorous investigation over a long period of time, 2 years, we thought we had answers to many, many of those questions, and they all suggested that litigation finance would be attractive in the United States. However, there was a leap of faith, as you're suggesting. We didn't know whether institutional investors would embrace the idea of a new investment strategy that had really never been tried or tested. There were no benchmarks, no track record, and maybe worse yet, being advocated by a group of people that weren't professional investors and had never worked investing the money of other people. So there was a bit of a leap of faith that would be successful, and it was. The reason I think it was successful is because some of the characteristics of litigation finance from an investor's perspective are very attractive, mainly that the outcomes, as you well know as a litigator, the outcomes of commercial litigation are not correlated to major investment indices, meaning that whether the stock market is up or down the day the jury's coming back really has no impact. And that extends to credit markets, equity markets. It really, outcomes of commercial litigation are not affected by presidential elections, weather patterns, geopolitical events. And as a result, investment in the outcome of legal claims serves to diversify investment portfolios. And that is a very, very attractive feature for institutional investors. They're always trying to find effective ways of diversifying their portfolios. And it turned out that was the key for the interest from investors. And then the other unknown that we had to really test to determine whether we were right was interest and demand for this form of financing from major law firms like yours and clients. Was our impression that this would be so attractive going to prove to be true? And of course, the answer to that was yes.
Yeah, kind of overwhelmingly. And in these uncertain times that we find ourselves in June of 2020, it absolutely is the case that people are looking for hedges and non-cyclical investments like that. So it turned out to be quite propitious to launch when you did. And I know you have a lot of demand for folks who want you to deploy their resources, which is a wonderful problem to have. You talked about relationships, and you had such an interesting insight into, what you gleaned from your prosecutorial role in learning about people, learning their stories. Are there things, for the professionals out there, whether they're lawyers or non-lawyers, and they're starting their career and they're thinking about things that they ought to be doing to establish the kinds of relationships and glean from conversations like you're alluding to? Are there things that you would recommend people think about, that you think about when you're choosing your lawyers or you're choosing your investors?
Certainly. One of the things we say usually on a weekly basis at Longford Capital is that we have a passion for continuous improvement. And that there's a lot that encompasses in our minds. And it means that we're never as bright as others in a particular area. There's always room to learn and to grow and to improve. It's really the basis for our investment selection process. We have this process that's a two-step process for selecting investments. The first is done internally by our team of lawyers at Longford, but without exception, we always move investments to the second stage before making an investment. And we refer to that second stage as the independent legal review process. We always hire an outside law firm We've hired K&L Gates on a number of occasions for this process to assist us in evaluating as many as 50 different characteristics of an investment opportunity. The rationale and the reason why we do that is based upon this concept of continuous improvement and the understanding that there's always a lawyer or an expert somewhere in the country that will be able to bring value to our analysis and teach us something that we don't know. There's always somebody a little bit smarter. And I followed that philosophy in my practice of law by always hiring local counsel. Maybe it's the local knowledge of the local rules or the jury pool or understanding the peculiarities of the judge that you could only understand by having been in that environment for a long period of time. That's what I would encourage, anybody in any profession to consider. Approach any task or any opportunity with the idea that the minute one believes that they have all the answers is probably when they're going to get themselves in trouble.
Bill, it's so interesting you say that because a podcast episode that we just launched with Ken Hirsch, who was the CEO of Natural Gas Partners, a huge energy fund. He trained at the feet of Richard Rainwater, who many consider to be the father of private equity. And now he's the CEO of the Bush Institute, which of course is the entity raising money to support the Presidential Library for 43. And he said the exact same thing. He said, long after he had made it, he would go to these seminars and he would show up early and stay till the bitter end. Now, this is a guy who's, succeeded at the highest levels in private equity, but he said you can always learn from everybody you interact with if you understand a little bit in detail. And so it's so interesting to hear you say that in a different kind of investment world, but it's the same principle that applies. So is there something, I guess there's an instinct that we all develop, and I'm sure you've developed an instinct for who you trust to give you the kind of dispassionate advice on your investment choice. What are some characteristics of counsel, outside lawyers that you select to help you evaluate your investment opportunities?
First, it is a solid command of the subject matter that's at issue. And secondly, it's a wealth of experience unique to the venue or jurisdiction where we're going to be having the case. That's where it starts. And then beyond that, maybe more intangible but equally important are a sense of trust, a sense that members of our team are communicating our objectives with that lawyer or team of lawyers, making sure that we believe and have confidence that the team we select to help us with the underwriting process understands what we're looking for. In other words, we're not looking for a rubber stamp. We're not looking for affirmation of what we may have concluded about a particular opportunity, but rather a very, as you described it, dispassionate, objective, rather critical analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of a case. And really, the way we put it very simply for those teams is help us identify the greatest weaknesses and the best defenses against our position. What will we expect from the opponent in the case? And then if we can answer those to a satisfactory level, we'll be satisfied to make an investment.
That's your dad's humility coming through, that if you have all the answers before you ask an expert for their wisdom, you usually end up making bad investments sometimes. But if you have a humility and really a curiosity of what someone else's perspective is, you oftentimes learn something maybe you hadn't thought of, not because of anything other than you just didn't get to the same place at so it's interesting to hear the beginning and the instructive experience that the one comment that comes through about your dad pulls through to your investment decision. That's great.
When we make the independent legal review process such an important part of our underwriting, what we have found is it really engenders great relationships moving forward with those legal teams, and oftentimes leads to investment opportunities.
Yeah.
And the lawyers really enjoy the process because as commercial litigators, we are bound to zealously advocate on behalf of our client. It's very rare that we're asked to take more of the arbitrator or mediator's role in analyzing a case. And so our ILR teams kind of appreciate the change of pace, where they're being asked to, from a neutral perspective, evaluate the case from both sides. And they seem to like it quite a bit.
Yeah, that's hadn't thought of that. That's fascinating. You do get to play more of an independent role, which is rare. It shouldn't be, right? I mean, we should be taking that off, that zealous advocate hat off, but a lot of lawyers don't these days. And it also seems to drive, I mean, the litigation funding trend seems to drive some corrections in litigation that were kind of harming, if you will, that litigation industry. Can you talk a little bit about, the why of litigation funding and how it helps mature an industry that maybe was going down some inefficient paths, and how you play a role in making that change?
Well, I suspect that all of us hope that the legal system, our court system, is a means by facilitating just outcomes for those people that rely upon it to solve disputes. And in America, I believe we have the best legal system in the world. It is in large measure free from corruption, and we probably take that for granted sometimes, but that's not true in all parts of the world, as I've seen at Longford Capital. But I think that the litigation funding industry, on the whole, and certainly at Longford Capital, we're striving to provide access to justice to companies that without our funding may not be able to afford competent or qualified legal representation, or may not be able to access the legal system at all. And when they do access the legal system, we try to, and I believe we're achieving, leveling the economic playing field between the plaintiff and the defendant. You kind of think of these situations where maybe a small family-owned company working very hard just to make ends meet engages in a contract with a very, very large company, and then a dispute arises. Being able to hire lawyers to go toe-to-toe with the big corporations, highly qualified lawyers, is really an important part of achieving success in our legal system. And so leveling the playing field and accessing justice is something that's important to us at Longford. We see it happening because we work with companies that tell us that every day, and it's a very rewarding experience to help a company achieve those outcomes.
Yeah, and it's facilitating great commercial litigators getting to ply their trade on very valid causes of action that clients might not have engaged them to do. So it's it has a very positive effect, I think, for the law firms as well. So we're in this pandemic. We've talked about it. It started, depending on who you talk to, it started in January, February of 2020, and now we're in June. And many of us still, Chicago has obviously been a hotbed of cases. I'm not in Texas now, but in Texas where I typically live, we're seeing a rise again in cases. Talk a little bit about how you mentioned you like to meet with people in person, obviously not possible during the pandemic as easily. But how have things changed for Longford during the pandemic and the industry that you're in? And what do you see as one thing that you think has changed during this pandemic that you kind of hope stays the same, that it's really been a better, a more efficient approach to how we do business that you think we'll see after we come up with a vaccine, hopefully?
Sure. Well, first of all, I can't think of the pandemic without expressing my condolences to the hundreds of thousands of people that have been tremendously affected from a health perspective, and those that have died and have been gravely ill. The other consequence of the pandemic is the economic fallout that has followed and has affected every industry, including the legal industry. From the litigation finance industry, what we have seen is that the reasons why both leading law firms and their corporate clients have found litigation finance to be attractive as a means of paying for meritorious legal claims are being accentuated right now. Most every company is facing uncertainty, economic and financial uncertainty. I think the same is true for law firms. Their clients are suffering economically, so they are too going to suffer economically. And having a solution to rely upon, like litigation finance, that enables a company to pursue a meritorious legal claim, to defend their legal rights, and to monetize the value of legal claims and treat them as corporate assets is more attractive now than ever before. Mm-hmm. And likewise at law firms, seeking to help their clients through this difficult time, being able to add to your offering of services, the ability to pursue a case for your client, but without asking them to pay for it on a monthly basis at a time that's most challenging over the past, 25 years perhaps, or 50 years, is really beneficial for lawyers. And so what we are seeing is an uptick in opportunities to work with our trusted law firm partners to help their clients. And it feels really good to partner with a law firm leader like yourself and go to a client and say, okay, we have a solution for you. You're not going to have to just ignore that breach of contract case. We can pursue it for you, and we have a way of financing it for you. It's really nice. I think that what will come out of it, after we were able to get back to normal, and what I hope remains is additional awareness and acceptance of litigation finance. And I think that will absolutely be the case. We're hopefully helpful in bad times. And when clients and law firm partners see that, I think they'll realize, well, this works in good times too. Even if a client can pay its law firm on an hourly basis, I think that once they become aware of this option, litigation finance, I think they'll say, well, this is a better alternative for me. I can't, but I'd rather invest that money in my core business, in right. Plant and equipment or research and development. And litigation's not my business. Let's partner with the experts, with a great law firm, and pursue it that way. And I think that's what may come out of this.
Well, I smile because, it's exactly what Ross Perot, my very first client as a lawyer, came up with, right? Yes, you can be all things to all people, but really the highest value is what you do and do best. And outsourcing pieces of that non-essential business, which for a lot of companies is litigation. They don't want to be in the litigation business. And sometimes their risk aversion comes back to bite them in litigation. Fascinating parallel, just a different way we're outsourcing risk and investment dollars. It also seems to me, Bill, and tell me if I'm wrong, that this process that you set up, which sounds so fundamental to what Longford does, the evaluation process, as you get more opportunities and more investment dollars coming your way, that process becomes absolutely the gemstone to your creation of value for investors. Because if you don't funnel the opportunity the right way and analyze it the right way, dispassionately and with humility, you're not going to get a good ROI to your investors.
Well, that's absolutely true. And I have a greater vision for our industry, in the years to come. And that is that we may help facilitate faster and more just outcomes in commercial disputes. And the way that I see that perhaps playing out is that if companies in our industry like Longford are able to help litigants assess the strengths and weaknesses of their case dispassionately, which is oftentimes very hard for a client who may have emotion involved in their analysis. We may be able to come to faster, more just resolutions, much the way a mediator is able to help bring parties together and maybe understand at least the opposing parties' perspectives and possible strengths to their arguments. I'm hoping that our industry continues to evolve in that direction so that we continue to add value not only to our particular clients and our law firm partners, but to the whole legal industry, because faster, more just resolutions would be better for everyone.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fascinating. So I think we ought to end with this highly important question, which is, will Notre Dame football be back on the field with fans in the stands, or do you think we're going to have to watch a few games on NBC without fans in the stands?
That's a really good question. I've seen some stadiums testing cardboard mock-ups of rabid fans. And, just like we saw a restaurant or two using mannequins to try to fill the vacant booths. And, boy, I don't know. That would be odd. I hope we're back to college football, one of the greatest institutions we have.
Well, you come from two great universities with rich traditions in different sports, Indiana and basketball, and Notre Dame and football. And I hope you're right. I know that we do a lot of client roundtables and some of the peripheral industries, pyrotechnics and audiovisual and things like that are hopefully ramping up for the start of sports again. And I know slowly we're seeing our sports get back out there, but we're very much praying for that same thing. Hope we get back to watching some live sports in person and get to kind of enjoy that great feeling you have watching football live or another sport live. So thank you very much.
I was just going to thank you, Craig. It's this series that you've put together is really interesting to me. I'm flattered to be a part of it. And it's really important. You said it, you enjoy it, and it's a lot of fun for you. But the more we're able to maintain our relationships and connectivity in our industry and beyond, I think the better we will be. As friends and acquaintances, we do better solving problems. And this is one example of that. I'm really impressed with what you're doing. So thank you very much for including me.
Thank you. I mean, the whole goal of it is to take great people like you and have people understand their paths that may not always be the same paths they're going to take, and deduce, values and principles and how they think about approaching their careers, and any other difficult decisions they have. And you've unsurprisingly been a great example of somebody who people can learn from. So I know with how long you've been friends with John Garda that you're the gold standard. So since he's the gold standard too, and this has been quite an enjoyable hour, and I know people are going to enjoy listening to it. So I look forward to seeing you with our respective, sports jerseys on, and when we can be in person. But in the interim, thank you again, Bill, for your time. I know how busy you are, and really appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.